Hello, everyone. I'm Whitney Wallace. Over the last few months, I've had the chance to chat with almost all of you, I think, and I'm so excited that the time has finally come for us to start the support networks. I think we're going to have a great time together, working together, collaborating, and I'm just so grateful that I know that you're all so busy, and so I'm grateful that you were able to take the time. Just one note before we begin, I am in a shared space today, so I apologize if there's any background noise. We will do our best to minimize that, and just please be patient with us. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the camera so that we can begin. I'm excited to get started. All right, today I am here with Tamala Olsby. She is also a program specialist at TEA, and she will be running technical assistance. She will also be responding to any questions you may have through GoToWebinar. Before we begin, I have just a couple of housekeeping items. First, everyone is muted and will remain muted throughout the webinar. If you do have a question, we definitely want you to ask it, so please just type it in the question/chat box. Tamala will answer any questions she can, and we will have a time for questions at the end of the webinar where I can answer any questions that she was unable to answer. And I'm also happy to follow up on questions after the webinar via phone or email. Whatever works for you guys works for me. You will also find a PDF version of this presentation under the handouts section in your pop-out box. So you're able to download that now if you would like, if you would find it helpful to follow along. The presentation will also be uploaded to our group website later in case you would like to access it. And then finally, this webinar is being recorded. We will then upload the webinar so anyone who is not available will be able to access it. And it will also be made accessible through the group website in case you would like to refer back to it at any point. And with that, we will go ahead and jump in. So we will quickly cover the agenda for today's meeting. First, I would like to do an overview of our cohort. Our group is the Quality Green Group. We will learn about each other, look at the survey results that will drive the scope and sequence of our work for the year, and then we will look at the year at a glance. Afterwards, we will discuss leadership's role in supporting early childhood education before moving into how we can build administrator knowledge surrounding early childhood practices. So before we jump in, I just want us to ground ourselves in what developmentally appropriate practice, or DAP, is. We will be centering ourselves on DAP throughout our time together over the course of the year, so I want to make sure that we have a common understanding. I'm just going to go ahead and read it for us now. Developmentally appropriate practice, or DAP, is a framework grounded in research that outlines practice that promotes young children's optimal learning and development. So we will definitely come back to that many times over the course of today and over the course of the year. So now we will jump into content centered on our cohort. So on the screen, you will see a list of school districts participating in our cohort. I am so excited for us to have the opportunity to collaborate with one another. As I spoke with each one of you on the phone calls this summer, I was inspired by the work that you're doing surrounding early childhood education, and I'm so excited for us to get to share with each other over the course of the year. So this slide summarizes some of the results from the survey I sent out this summer. The results from the survey helped to drive the scope of our work this year. So I'm just going to kind of dive into this a little bit in depth so that we have some context for what we're going to focus on this year. So first, let's focus on our strengths as a group. Most districts use a scope and sequence in pre-K and kindergarten, which is fantastic. As scope and sequences allow us to look at the big picture throughout the year. By creating a scope and sequence, we are better able to align instruction across grade levels. Additionally, most districts provide at least one opportunity for pre-K and kindergarten teachers to meet throughout the year. Again, this kind of collaboration can lead to stronger alignment between grade levels as teachers are able to work together. Almost 3/4 of districts are engaging families in the transition from pre-K to kindergarten, and that's fantastic news. Research shows us that family involvement in the transition between pre-K and kindergarten can have a huge impact on student success as they move to kindergarten. So it's fantastic that that number is so high. And then our final strength as a group is that more than half of respondents reported administrators provide a lot or a great deal of support in alignment. This shows we have campus administrators who really see the value of alignment, which is perfect for our cohort. On the right-hand side are a couple of areas or opportunities for growth. And I've picked these 3 specifically because they are things that we will work on over the course of the year. So approximately 1/3 of respondents reported that vertical alignment is rarely present in content and instructional strategies for pre-K and kindergarten. So we would ideally see this a number much higher. Oh, sorry, I think that I misspoke on that one. So I think that only 1/3 reported that it is present. So we want to see that number much higher. I apologize for that. The second is 28% of respondents reported that both pre-K and kindergarten have at least 7 learning centers in their classroom. So that number is fairly low based on what we'd like to see. One of the things we will is aligning instruction in classrooms so that pre-K and kindergarten classrooms actually look quite a bit alike. So ideally, both pre-K and kindergarten students would be engaging in learning centers. I think the percentage was much higher for pre-K classrooms that have at least 7 centers, but that both is where we had lower numbers because I think a lot of kindergarten classes may not have that many. Finally, 71% of districts reported that their administrators' level of early childhood pedagogy was at a moderate amount or less. And that makes sense. That's one of the things we'll talk about today. Some administrators do not have experience in the lower grade levels, but we do know, though, that in order to have rigorous, developmentally appropriate pre-kindergarten and kindergarten classrooms, we need administrators who are invested in and knowledgeable about their early grades. So as I mentioned, that last point regarding administrator knowledge actually brings us for our topic today, which you will see under the Unit 1 heading. So we will be building administrator knowledge. On the screen, you can also see the unit topics for the rest of the year. These are primarily based on information I received through the survey or phone calls, sort of pinpointing needs across the board. And while they may change a bit as the year progresses, depending on how our work together goes, you can expect that it will mostly stay the same. And obviously, if anything changes, I will make sure to update all of the documents that I have listed these on, mostly found on our group website. So before we officially jump into our content, I just want to ground us in our theory of change for this cohort. So each time we meet, we will locate how our specific topic for that unit plays into this theory of change. So as you can see, the theory culminates in an increase in developmentally appropriate practice, and we believe that leads to alignment, which is ultimately the goal of our work together. So today's focus centers on increasing administrators' knowledge of developmentally appropriate practice, which lies on the left side of the chart. So as our work continues over the course of this year, we will work through the different stages so that we can ultimately end up at that right-hand box where we're really increasing alignment. So we will now talk about leadership's role in supporting early childhood education. So in order to best support early childhood teachers, administrators must create a strong early learning environment. And I should say as a caveat that when I say administrators, I definitely mean campus level administrators, but also district level staff as well. I think that we know that that support to campus level administrators comes from the district level, so this applies to both. So administrators must create a strong early learning environment, and in order to do that, they must create a culture that values early learning and developmentally appropriate practice. And in order to make that happen, administrators must be knowledgeable about the pedagogy at these grade levels. So we will talk more in a little bit about how to increase administrators' knowledge, different steps and different actions that we can take to make sure that that's happening. The next 2 points may sound more familiar. They are common actions an administrator can take to support almost any grade level. So driving effective teaching through the coaching cycle. But again, administrators do need knowledge of the grade level they are observing to do this effectively, and also creating structures that support quality instruction. So I think we all know that there are barriers that can prevent administrators from fully engaging in and understanding early childhood education and supporting early childhood teachers. There are so many things that may demand their attention. And so on the screen, I've listed a few things that may take some time and attention away from administrators. So the first is pressure to improve scores on state tests. And I think often the result of that is that administrators may focus primarily on the testing grades, so 3rd grade and up, and may not put as much attention and focus on those lower grades. And the second is that some school leaders may not have experience in pre-kindergarten through 3rd grade, and so may not completely understand what's happening in those grade levels. And then finally, a lack of time. I think that's probably the case for anyone in education, but we definitely know for administrators. So finding the time to really learn about early childhood and developmentally appropriate practice can definitely be a challenge. So we have discussed the importance of building administrators' knowledge, and we will now dive into the knowledge they need. At the heart of early childhood education and what administrators need to know, understand, and internalize is developmentally appropriate practice. So this is really what we're going to focus on today, and this section actually might be helpful to pass on to any campus leaders that might need a little bit of knowledge surrounding developmentally appropriate practice. And again, this presentation will be available online, so you're welcome to pass it along later if you think that would be helpful. So we're actually going to start with a short activity because you've been listening to me talk for quite some time. So if you would get out your phone or your computer and go to the website that's on your screen, there's going to be a question. The question is, what does developmentally appropriate practice mean? So if you would log into Answer Garden, I'll leave that up for just a minute. It will also be in the web link bar on the website when I transition. But if you will make your way over there and just type in what you think your answer is before we jump into developmentally appropriate practice. So I'm going to switch over to Answer Garden now, which means this page will go away, but you will still be able to find the website link at the top of the website where you would normally type in the website that you're looking for. So it doesn't look like we have any answers yet. Again, the website is right up here. I can highlight it so you can see it. If you want to make your way there and answer the question, that would be great. We have our first answer. So someone said strategies on level for students, which is absolutely correct. So developmentally appropriate means that you are doing things that are the right thing for your students, for the level that your students are at. I would love if there are any more responses to get those. We can go for about 1 more minute. We have a lot of responses. So we have teaching children at their level, strategies on level for students, meets the physical and mental needs. I think that's fantastic, thinking about the physical abilities of our students, and then instruction that is aligned. I will redo it 1 more time to see if we have any more responses. Oh, perfect. Aligned with child ability. These are all great responses. Thank you so much for participating. I appreciate it. We will hop back into our presentation. So we saw this definition earlier in the presentation, but I wanted to bring it back because it will center us on our work together this year. So I'm going to read it aloud 1 more time. Developmentally appropriate practice, or DAP, I may refer to it as DAP throughout the presentation, is a framework grounded in research that outlines practice that promotes young children's optimal learning and development. So both that learning piece and the development piece are both important when it comes to developmentally appropriate practice. So just want to provide a bit of context. The term and concept of developmentally appropriate practice came from the National Association for the Education of Young Children, often referred to as NAEYC. It was first adopted in 1986, but was revised in 1996 and 2009, and is actually being revised as we speak. So it just provides a framework for how to best work with young children. So today I am going to really walk us through the main components of developmentally appropriate practice. This is something we will be looking at throughout our work together this year. So we may dive into some areas on a deeper level today and just skim through some others. So I am taking all of this information from Developmentally Appropriate Practice in Early Childhood Program serving children birth through age 8, which was published by NACCE in the last revision of 2009. And if possible, I will post that on our group's website so that you have access to all of this in its original form. So one area that we are going to dive into pretty deeply today are the 3 core considerations of DAP. These are components to consider when planning instructional activities for students. So I'm going to read them out loud. It says, what is known about child development and learning? What is known about each child as an individual? What is known about the social and cultural context in which children live? So really looking at the students that you have when making instructional decisions. We are going to do a short activity next. I want you to keep these 3 considerations in mind as we do the activity. So I'm going to let you take one more moment to look at them, and then we will move on. So we're going to play a bit of a game. I will read 2 situations to you, and after I read both, I would love for you to type in I think it's a question/chat box that you will find on the right-hand side of your screen if it's popped out. And I want you to write if you think these are developmentally appropriate or not developmentally appropriate. For example, you might say DAP/not DAP if you think the first is developmentally appropriate and the second is not. So your answers will remain private and only myself and Tamala will see them. So I'm going to read both activities and then ask you to respond. So the first says, 4-year-olds in a pre-kindergarten class are studying oceans. The teacher has planned a variety of hands-on activities for children to explore ocean animals and their habitats. So don't write yet, but think, does that seem developmentally appropriate or not? Okay, the next situation is children have been working in centers. The teacher gives a 5-minute warning that children will be cleaning up soon. So when you're ready, please insert in that chat question feature whether you think those 2 examples, or maybe one of the 2 examples, is developmentally appropriate or not. I will give a couple of minutes for your answers to come in, and then we'll move on to the next part of our activity. So I'm seeing the first one is DAP. So people are starting to come in. Yes, they are both appropriate. Tamala may respond with a little word. I got a yes and a yes. So I think the general consensus when we look at these, and I would agree, is these both seem completely developmentally appropriate. So we're going to move on to the next slide. I'm going to provide a bit more context for each situation. Okay. So I want you to type in the chat feature if your feelings have changed regarding whether or not these are developmentally appropriate based on the new information. Please also tell us why the additional information changed your opinion. I'm going to pop this box out so I can hopefully see more of your answers. There was one answer that said both are appropriate as long as instruction is aligned and children have a chance to explore. So I'm wondering if that second one has changed now that we find out they haven't had quite as much time. I'll give a couple more minutes. If your feelings have changed, please just type it in that questions box. Let me see. Continue to type in. Oh, so one of them has changed to a no now. Very interesting. We will take just a couple more seconds. If anybody else wants to type in if their feelings have changed. All right. So while the 2 situations definitely, I would have said absolutely before that they were developmentally appropriate, The additional information makes us see how the three core considerations can be so important. So when we learn that the children live in West Texas and have never seen the ocean, we might think about the third core consideration, and that is what is known about the social and cultural context in which children live. So the ocean is not part of the social and cultural context for children in West Texas, so it's not completely developmentally appropriate. The second situation taps into core consideration 1, what is known about child development and learning. We know students should be in centers for more than 15 minutes to truly get into their activity and to be thinking at a high level. And so even though the teacher is giving a 5-minute warning, which is definitely best practice, the students have not had enough time to engage in their work. So I'm going to skip to our next slide to provide more information on that. Thank you all for responding. So these examples show that what is developmentally appropriate depends on each individual situation, which is what makes it tricky. And it also is what makes it so important that administrators have a strong understanding of developmentally appropriate practice and how to make DAP decisions. So this slide highlights a quote from a book which focuses on the same thing. I'm going to read it very quickly. A practice that might be developmentally appropriate under one set of circumstances might be developmentally inappropriate under another. So those students who are learning about the ocean in West Texas, maybe that's not developmentally appropriate since they are not visiting the ocean. But if you were a pre-K teacher in Corpus Christi, that would be one of the most appropriate topics that you could study because that's something your students are engaging with on a regular basis. So it does make it a little tricky. It's not black and white. You really have to think about what students you have and their unique situations. So we just learned that developmentally appropriate practice requires context. When deciding if something is developmentally appropriate, you can ask yourself the 3 questions on this slide, which were basically just adapted from the 3 core considerations. So 1 is this age appropriate? 2, is this appropriate for the particular children in the classroom? And 3, is this culturally and socially appropriate? So the next 2 slides will focus on the 12 principles of development and learning, also from NAEYC. I will go over these briefly as most of our work this year will incorporate these principles in some way or another. Just going to read through them fairly quickly because they will be embedded in everything else that we do. So 1 is all developmental domains are important and interrelated, so really teaching to the whole child. 2, many aspects of children's learning and development follow well-documented sequences, which means that you need to know what those documented sequences are. 3, development and learning occur at varying rates. I think anyone who's been in an early childhood classroom is well aware of that. Number 4, development and learning result from biological maturation and experience. Number 5, early experiences have profound effects on a child's development and learning. Number 6, development proceeds towards greater complexity, self-regulation, and symbolic or representational capacities. Number 7, children best develop in the context of secure and positive relationships, which is something we'll talk about this year. Social and cultural context influence development and learning, which is something we've already hit on today. Children learn in a variety of ways. Play is important for developing self-regulation, language cognition, and social competence. Development and learning advance when children are challenged and have opportunity to practice. And number 12 is children's experiences shape their motivations and approaches to learning. So we just skimmed over those very, very quickly, but we're going to do a quick write. You're going to utilize that question/chat feature again, so that Tamala will see all of your answers. And this question, let me see if I can get there, is how can an administrator's understanding of the 12 principles of child development and learning impact students? So those are the things we just went over very, very quickly, but I'm wondering if anything stood out to you that might impact students if more administrators had a better understanding of that topic. I'm going to wait and give about 1 minute for answers to come in and share out if they do. I'm actually going to scroll back through those 2 slides so that you can see them again, so that you can see if anything stands out as something that would be really impactful for administrators to be aware of as they support classrooms and teachers. Yeah, we have a great answer. It says they would know what to look for in the classroom instruction from the teacher, which is absolutely right. If you were to walk in to a classroom and not have an understanding of developmentally appropriate practice, maybe you've only taught, fourth or fifth grade, which I've taught in the past, you may not understand what's going on, right, in a pre-K or kindergarten classroom. I see when you're developing a master schedule, you need to take some of these things into consideration. That's absolutely right. And we see that some of these things would take up a certain amount of time, and we would need to plan for that. And I see understanding the 12 principles will help admin to help support teachers in leading social, emotional, and academic lessons. It's absolutely right. So I think if you don't have a knowledge of DAP, you may be solely focused on that academic piece. And when you walk into a classroom, may not value the social, emotional, or the play aspect. We just got a message that play is important, which is absolutely correct at those lower grades. Thank you so much for your responses. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and move us along. So finally, we have come to the 5 guidelines for developmentally appropriate practice. Again, we will cover all of these in depth over the course of our work together, but I will briefly go through them. And you'll see that a lot of these overlap with the 3 core considerations and the 12 principles. They're all intertwined. So 1 is creating a caring community of learners. 2 is teaching to enhance development and learning. 3 is planning curriculum to achieve important goals. 4 is assessing children's development and learning. And 5 is establishing reciprocal relationships with families. So we have finally reached the big question. If an administrator is well-versed in all that we've covered today, really understands DAP, has a strong understanding, knows what should be going on in a pre-kindergarten and kindergarten classroom, what can they do to support developmentally appropriate practice in classrooms? And we are going to cover a lot of these things over the course of this year. I think our next unit is heavily focused on professional development and how administrators can directly support teachers. But there are some options on the screen. So the first is know what DAP is and talk about it with teachers. That's pretty simple. Host early childhood specific staff meetings and professional development. That will be a focus of our next training or next webinar. Engage teachers in conversations to explore the aspects of DAP. Observe early childhood classrooms with a DAP focus. So again, going in, understanding that it's going to look different than a 4th or 5th grade classroom and being adaptable to that and maybe even having a different tool to observe that classroom with. Support teachers in development of DAP-related knowledge and skills, and then set goals with staff related to DAP. So really a key part of our work this year is this slide, how to put these things into action in a school to really support developmentally appropriate practice, which we believe will lead to alignment if it's happening in both pre-K and kindergarten classrooms. So we are nearing the end of our time together for today, but before we jump into a time for questions, I would love for us to look at action steps. So after each webinar, I will ask you to develop action steps for your district, things that you could do pertaining to the specific topic that we've covered. And this isn't meant to be intimidating, and the steps might look different for everyone. So it might be a small step for one school, it might be a really large step for another district, depending on where you are and how many steps you need to take to make change where you are. So we will address these action steps in our one-on-one phone calls and during our PLCs. So I will give guiding questions for each action step to help you think through what you could do to increase administrators' knowledge of DAP. So that's our focus for today. So there are 2 guiding questions. I will read them out loud. The first is, how can you increase administrators' knowledge of DAP in your district? And how can administrators in your district support teachers' implementation of DAP? So an example of how this might differ, we may have some administrators on the phone call, so that might look different what you're going to do on your campus to invest your administrators just on your campus, or if you could, go to the district and spread it out wider. That may look different than if you are at a district level, what you're able to do. So I'd like for you to think through these steps in your context and be ready to talk about them in our PLC and in our phone call that will come up. So before we finish with the time for questions, I just want to go through our next steps together. So we will have our first PLC meeting on Wednesday, October 3rd at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the guiding question will be the question our conversation centers on. And we will obviously talk about different things things. The goal is really to help each other, but I want us to have a centerpiece to go back to in the conversation. And so our guiding question is, how can increasing campus administrators' knowledge of DAP foster alignment between pre-kindergarten and kindergarten? So you will also begin to have your one-on-one phone calls with me in October, and you should have received a calendar invitation for each of those phone calls, probably all at once. You got a lot of emails, I apologize. But if you did not receive that, please let me know, and I will get those on the calendar so that we definitely have a time to touch base for each unit. So that is all the information that I have for you today. I'm going to open up the floor for any questions that you have now. Please use the question/chat feature, and I will answer as many questions as I can. So this is the last call for questions. If you have any you'd like answered now, we will hang on here for just a few more minutes in case you do have any, but so far it doesn't look like any have come in, so we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. My contact information is on the screen, so please feel free to call me or email me with any additional questions. And once again, I would just like to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to meet with me today. And I'd like to thank Tamala for managing all of the comments that were coming in during the webinar. And I look forward to chatting with all of you on October 3rd. We will hang on for a few more minutes. Feel free to ask questions, or if you need to get back to other things, feel free to do that as well. Thank you so much.